Live?
You,
You are live.
council, I'd like to call this regular council meeting of April 18th, 2023 to order. And first order of business, Mr. Black, cue the gavel. Awesome, appreciate that. We're going to go to adoption of the agenda as amended with inclusion of the tax rate bylaw under 9B. Someone want to make that motion? Councilor Cherry, seconded by Councilor Lucel. All in favor? Motion's carried. Going on to adoption of the minutes of the regular council meeting of April 11th, 2023. Someone want to make that motion for me? Councilor Devlin, second by Councilor Cherry. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Any business arising from the minutes of the council meeting of April 11th? Seeing none, I am going to go on to announcements from the mayor. So just a couple of announcements. I want to say congratulations to the Revelstoke Grizzlies for winning the Cyclone Taylor Cup. It was a great tournament. Good to see so many people out. And congratulations to the organizers of the Cyclone Taylor Cup. Kevin Dorius and his team did an incredible job of putting everything together. Just really appreciative of everyone who took part and was present and enjoyed the weekend. So it's great. Further to that, I want to talk a little bit about our engagement process on the Revelstoke Forum. So that process has now started. People can engage with Talk Revelstoke, give their opinions, but also Mr. Parliament and Mr. Nato were out over the weekend with the postcards that people could pick up, scan, and be able to give input. So definitely that input or engagement process is going to be there until May 31st. So people, we want to hear what you have to say about what the potential work is regarding the arena. Anything that I've missed on that, Mr. Parliament?
No, just want to add special thanks to all the staff that worked at the Cyclone Taylor Cup since last week. Preparation started on Tuesday and the first game was Thursday. I was there most of the time for over the 4 days, and the facility was clean. The reception was friendly. The ice maintenance was superb. There was a couple of incidents involving some blood on the ice, and the ice makers were there immediately, like an NHL standard. And of course, the ice is very good. I heard nothing but compliments from all the players on the condition of the ice. So even though the old lady is 63 years old, it was a fun place to be at. So special thanks to the staff. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Mr. Parliament. I've heard her called many things, but the old lady is not one that I've heard before, and I like that because I'm a couple of years older than her. So, all right, we're going to move on to bylaws 9A. Someone put that motion on the table for me, please. Councilor Devlin. Devlin, do you want to say it?
I'm just trying to find it. 1 second. I move that utility rate bylaw number 2351 be adopted.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councilor Lucel. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to item 9B. Someone want to put that motion on the table for me, please? Councilor Stapleton.
Move that the 2023 City of Revelstoke tax rate bylaw number 2352 be read at first, second, and third time.
Seconder for the motion, Councilor Lucel. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to item 9C. Councilor Lucel.
I move that the 2023 financial plan bylaw number 2353 be adopted.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councilor Cherry. Any discussion on that motion? Saying none, all those in favor? Opposed? No, motion's carried. Item 9D. So there's 3 parts to this. So someone want to do number 1 for me, please? Councilor Devlin.
I move that development application procedures bylaw number 2356 be read at first, second, and third time.
Seconder for that motion, please. Councilor Lucel. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Oh, your worship, sorry, I'm just waiting for an opportunity for some discussion. First of all, your worship, is there any presentation associated with this?
Mr. Simon, do you have a presentation?
Through your worship, so staff do have a presentation. We have Miss Nancy Henderson, who is the senior local government advisor for urban systems. If council recalls, we did a committee of the whole meeting earlier this year to discuss both our development application procedure bylaw as well as our delegation bylaw. So what you're seeing before you today is a manifestation of those previous discussions. And I think the main points today that we will be focusing on is, what the major changes are to this bylaw from what currently exists. It has to do with delegation of development permits, as well as creating a category of minor development variance permits and delegation of minor development variance permits to staff in certain circumstances. So without further ado, I see Ms. Henderson has joined now, and we have a brief presentation for you to go over some of the major changes as contemplated in this bylaw for council consideration.
We can see your screen, Nancy, go ahead.
Perfect. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council, and I understand you have a jam-packed agenda today, so I am going to move through this presentation quite quickly, and if you want, we can go back and discuss some of the things I'm kind of blowing through based on your time frame and just kind of focusing on the major changes. So as Council knows, we've been working with staff on the development modernization project, and one of the key implementation items is it creating a new development application procedures bylaw. So we're going to be kind of going over some of the key changes with you and focusing in on the areas that are typically of most interest to council in and around delegation to staff, particularly the minor development variance permit as now allowed under the Local Government Act, public consultation and notification, as there's no longer a default requirement for public hearings that are in alignment with the OCP, and increasing the scope of delegation of development permits as discussed previously with council and reflecting the direction at that time, and then just kind of get into the next steps. So I think we'll just kind of go through these slides really quickly. Council is aware that this is a fully funded project by UBCM. And this is one of the key phases of the project, which are all coming to a close in mid-August, which we are on track to finalize in that timeframe. This is coming from the province, and it's really the idea of streamlining applications as a means to help increase the housing supply in British Columbia. And so we're following sort of the guidelines that have been recommended by the provincial government, as well as just based on sort of comparative review and implementation of best practices. Some of the key legislative changes that the province enacted in hopes of speeding up the development approval process was removing the default requirement to hold public hearings only for zoning bylaws that are in alignment or consistent with the official community plan, and have also increased the ability to delegate minor development variance permits to staff based on the establishment of criteria and guidelines, and we'll talk about that today. The purpose of this bylaw is to reflect these amendments as well as opportunities to improve processes. The bylaw before you today is much more comprehensive than the existing bylaw that the city has currently. So what are these bylaws all about? They're really about establishing clear development application processing procedures to improve consistency, no matter what staff is processing the application and no matter the time frame. We have a development approval information and requirements for professional reliance outlined in the plan. And we have public engagement and notification requirements that go beyond public hearings. Agency referral, just making it clear that the city does refer to outside agencies and internally as well. And there's quite a lot of information in and around the collection of security as well, which is very technical, but just in terms of like what's being collected, what percentage, and how it's released so that it could be done consistently. And then it also includes delegation of council authority with respect to land use applications. So in terms of what we're doing is we would be replacing the existing development approval procedures bylaw in its totality. And then there's also some amendments to the fees bylaw and the council delegation bylaw as well. And these are also attached to your council report. And it's important to be clear, it's not a comprehensive fee review by any means. That was part of the review that we included in your report, but we've just added a couple items just to make it a little bit easier, less administrative burden regarding third-party reviews, and then moving what was in the delegation bylaw into this bylaw. So for ease of reference of the development community and staff. This outlines sort of the scope of the bylaw, which I'm going to go through those key items as mentioned previously. So the Local Government Act changed to allow for the delegation of development variance permits to staff. And it's set to the criteria generally around zoning bylaws, parking loading requirements, signs, screening and landscaping is generally where the municipalities are implementing these delegated minor variances. Criteria must be established to determine what is minor, and then the delegate must consider guidelines on when to issue the development variance permit. And we've put quite a bit in your council report outlining a couple of the different approaches being used in the province, and we've established the criteria and guidelines within the bylaw. And so the draft bylaw does propose to scope to delegate minor variances to staff. So they need to assess whether or not it is minor based on the criteria and guidelines and the merits of the application. One thing we are recommending is that notification be given to surrounding property owners. This is over and above what's required in the Local Government Act. The Local Government Act doesn't actually require notification for minor development variances. However, it does for variances being considered by council. Part of the reason that we are recommending it is that if there's a lot of concern by the neighbors that can't be mitigated by staff or the applicant, it would give the delegate the opportunity to opt out and say, you know what, there's a lot of concern about this variance and therefore it's no longer minor. And we're just going to put that up to council to make a decision. That way, it's kind of creating a better open for business feel, because staff could basically deny that minor variance and then the applicant would have the right to appeal to council. But you could see the feeling of that versus, you know what, this I think needs to be considered by council. We're going to move it forward. So it's a recommended approach, and we have this opt-out elsewhere in the bylaw regarding development permits as well. So public notification, again, is additional sort of notice and transparency. And when I came before council in the new year, there was also discussion about potentially changing the radius in which notices are sent and increasing that from the 100 meters to perhaps a higher amount. We've outlined some comparative municipalities and their distances of notification in your council report, and you'll see that 100 meters is actually at the kind of upper end of the comparative review. We are recommending that the city stick with the 100 meters, as increasing that does increase the administrative burden on staff quite substantially. And especially if you're in a downtown situation or a multifamily situation, it could really increase the amount of notifications that go out. And we have also provided some additional notification requirements in the bylaw over and above what's in your existing bylaw, which I will go through. So one of the other key changes that's happened from a legislation perspective that we've talked about is that the Local Government Act no longer requires a default public hearing for a zoning amendment. They're only required when an OCP amendment is needed in conjunction, or that zoning is not in alignment with the OCP. However, the province has required that a notice be sent out and an advertisement be placed in the newspaper prior to first reading, so that you can receive public comments. And then when council's considering first reading, you could always opt in and ask for a public hearing. So if you had something really contentious, it would be a decision of council to say, you know what, I'd like to hear more from the public on this case. And then what I'll do now is kind of go through some other public engagement options that have been included in the bylaw for council's consideration. And really what it's doing is trying to foster public engagement in the process earlier on, because public hearings are quite late in the process. The bylaws are already drafted. The developers the applicants spend a great deal of funds usually by that stage as well. So the more input we can have from the community earlier, it's generally thought to be better for everybody. So there is a suggestion of having public information meetings for certain types of applications to understand what's being proposed early in the process and being able to provide their input. And that essentially, you know, the applicant has the onus of running these meetings and advertising these meetings and to provide the summary. The city would provide a clear guide as to how to run these meetings, how to provide the what we heard material, making sure that it's balanced, really giving clear expectations, and staff would review this and it would be provided to council as you're considering readings of the application. We're also recommending the notice of a application sign for certain applications, namely OCP zoning amendments, temporary use permits, where there's they're non-discretionary, or they're discretionary applications. We're not recommending signs and notification for things like development permits, which are not discretionary, and I'll get into that when we get to the development permit section. So we would suggest we'll brand as part of this project what that sign template would look like. The onus of construction and posting the sign is on the applicant, and that we would also have some guidelines just to take into account Revelstoke's weather and snow when installing the sign. And that the signs would essentially be proofed by staff and put up, and that we've added provisions as well. If the signs aren't removed, that there could be fees associated with removing them to the applicant. So we do have additional mail notification, as I've mentioned, for minor development variance permits. We've added in the comprehensive development plan option as well, and associated notification for those. And then the public information meetings, which are over and above the Local Government Act. And keeping the distance with 100 meters is suggested. We've also made a change to sending the notification at least 15 days prior to the consideration of the application, just giving a little more time to applicants. And in this day and age, I know if anyone's like me, they're not checking their mail very often. So it gives just a little bit more time. Another thing that we're working on separate of this procedures bylaw as well is a number of GIS improvements and mapping improvements for the city. And this would be something else that we're looking to deliver as part of this project, is a web map, so that if you saw something going on in your neighborhood, maybe someone you thought, do they wonder if they have a building permit, or you see an application sign, you can go in and take a look at what's going on and get sort of a high level status update and find out what's going on in the community. It might just be of general interest on the larger community scale as well. I know there's signs that went up in my neighborhood, and this is kind of what I've done to gone into this map to figure out like what's happening and what the application is for. So now moving on to the delegation of development permits to staff. And I've got a clip here from the provincial development application process review, where it's a high priority for the province to see more delegation to staff as a means to sort of streamline and speed up processes across the province. I'm sorry about that. Development permits are non-discretionary. So basically, the city and the applicant are bound to the development permit guidelines, and the application must meet those guidelines. So if council's not liking what they're seeing being approved, that would basically suggest that the development permit guidelines need to change and that they would be amended. And that is also the time where the public would get involved, is the development of those development permit guidelines that are currently in your OCP. There's many examples of the courts ordering municipalities to approve development permits that they've withheld, maybe due to public concern or not liking what's being proposed in front of them, but it happens to meet the development permit guidelines. So when we discussed this with council in the new year, council's direction was to really take a measured approach regarding increasing delegation. That is exactly what we've done, and we'll kind of go over sort of taking an incremental approach to delegated development permits, which will give council and the municipality a chance to kind of review and see how they're going, and potentially increasing the scope over time as the comfort level increases. There's certainly municipalities around the province that have fully delegated all development approvals to staff. And so on that scale, Revelstoke would be on the more conservative side of things. So yeah, really proposing a measured or conservative approach at this time. We've reviewed with staff the development permits that have been presented to Revelstoke. I think council is looking for some background previously. So 37 development permit applications were presented to council for decision between January and April 2023, January 2020. And council support of staff recommendation occurred 97% of the time. Council altered the staff recommendation on 2 occasions, and council denied an amendment to a DP contrary to staff recommendation 1 time. And the total number of non-delegated DPs that were approved during that period were 37 under the current delegation parameters. And I think it's important to note that under this new bylaw and the delegation provisions, all 3 applications that were denied or altered by council would not qualify as being a delegated DP at this time and would be brought to council for consideration. So council would be seeing those types of situations anyway. And I think it's also important to note that under the new development application procedures bylaw, any industrial DP within 100 meters of a residential property would be brought to council. We are proposing that the scope of industrial development permits delegated to staff be increased. But there is only one situation that I think some of council would be familiar with, where of the 31 delegated DPs, council noted one concern, which related to the proposed use of the site and a noise nuisance. No concerns were identified in that situation regarding the form and character. It was more of a noise type situation. So the recommended scope of delegated DPs is residential development not exceeding 4 residential units outside of the downtown revitalization and Revelstoke Mountain Resort development permit area. So everywhere else but those areas. Industrial development, not exceeding 2 stories in height and 1,000 square meters of floor area. And also they also have to be greater than 100 meters from residential properties and outside of the downtown revitalization and Revelstoke Mountain Resort DPA. Commercial development permits not exceeding 3 stories and 500 square meters. The reason that industrial is recommended to be bigger is just like the scale of those buildings tend to be quite large. And again, not including downtown or Revelstoke Mountain Resort. Additions to existing buildings within the downtown revitalization area not exceeding 100 square meters or approximately 1,000 square feet, and not including alteration to facades. Technical development permits for environmentally sensitive and hazardous DPA, they're supported by professional reports. I would say that the vast majority of municipalities across the province are delegating these permits to staff. There'd also be opportunities for staff to renew development permits that have lapsed and remain unchanged, or minor amendments to existing approved permits, which sometimes happens as developers get closer to construction. There might be a material change or something like that to reflect market conditions, and just making sort of these non-material amendments would be delegated. So any DPs that don't meet the criteria for delegation would be considered by council. And if staff was to deny a development permit, then the applicant can request reconsideration by council. And same as discussed with the development variance permits is that the delegate may opt out when in the opinion of the delegate, it's in the public interest for the DP to be considered by council. So staff are feeling that this is borderline or there's a lot of concern around this type of development. They could just move an application up to council at their discretion. In terms of the heritage alteration permits, there's not a lot of change to the delegation there. The delegation is for residential and commercial facades, minor commercial additions, less than 100 square meters, signs, fences, accessory buildings, single or 2-unit residential additions, and renewal of unchanged or lapsed permits, and again, minor amendments. So we've also, it's not a comprehensive review of the fee bylaw, but we did make a couple changes just for ease of administration. There's currently abilities to charge the applicant for peer reviews that the city undertakes based on, for example, like a transportation impact assessment. What is being recommended is that a retainer would be provided so that rather than the city undertaking a peer review, getting the invoice, then having to bill the applicant, sometimes, it might be a couple months lag time and the application may have even been denied and sometimes it's hard to collect. So the recommendation is that you would collect a retainer up front and then you would just take those costs off the retainer and anything that's not expended would be refunded to the applicant. And then we've added an additional $250 fee for a second pre-application meeting following first one. Sometimes you're getting applicants that are constantly coming in for pre-application meetings, and there is a cost associated with that. So the ones that are looking for additional meetings, there would be a fee. The delegation bylaw, as I mentioned previously, the idea is to consolidate all land use approval delegation into this new development application procedures bylaw. So section 1 and 2 have been proposed to be removed from the existing bylaw, and then those provisions placed in the new draft bylaw of the delegation or the development application procedures bylaw. As far as development, industry, and community engagement, in our conversation with council in the new year, it suggested that we reach out to the development community, and over 60 members of the community were sent an email on April 4th. And so far, no responses have been received regarding the draft bylaw. This is not super uncommon. In case council's wondering, these bylaws, as you can see in your attached report, are quite technical. And while planners like myself might get kind of jazzed about them, the average community member is not that interested. And the development community has been kind of brought along, and some of the recommendations that they were suggesting at the beginning of this process have been included into the bylaw. In terms of the next steps, the bylaws are before you today for consideration of first, second, and third reading. In the meantime, we're going to continue to develop guides and templates and application forms that are well underway. And as we have, especially those critical ones that sort of fall in line as companion documents with this bylaw are ready to go, we will bring forward the bylaw for consideration of adoption. And this at this point, I'd like to hand it over to council if there's any questions or suggested revisions at this time.
Any comments or questions? Councillor Cherry and Councillor Staplenhurst.
Nothing at this time, thank you.
Councillor Cherry.
I'm curious if it'd be possible to have I believe it's a 15-day mailing schedule. If that could be increased. We had a recent application in front of us where, due to the way our mail system goes, they didn't receive any notification until a couple of days before the project came to the table.
Are you thinking about, 20 days?
Yeah, something like 20 days, 21, I think would be helpful in this, especially if our goal here is to have engagement at the front end of the process rather than the way it used to be, where it was all after third reading and at the public hearing, so after second reading, and public hearing.
So, yeah, I would be, well, let me go to Mr. Simon first.
Through your worship, Councillor Cherry, one thing to consider if you do want to continually keep expanding the timelines that we send out notifications is the way that staff prepare reports to get on the council agenda. We very well may have applications if you want to extend it, or it's already been extended from 10 days to 15. If you want to now extend that to 20 days before an application is considered by council or the delegate authority in the case of a minor variance, we might be in a circumstance where we're getting letters prepped and sent out for a file that is ultimately pulled before it goes to council. So one of the things to consider, we do got to balance this in terms of early notification with these files going through our agenda review process internally as well.
Just to follow up, your worship, currently we're at 10 days?
Yes, that is the minimum requirement as per the Local Government Act, and we've increased that to 15 days.
Is that 10 business days?
No, it would just be 10 standard days.
So I think that's what happened last time with the previous applicant was that the 10 days happened on 2 weekends and bill got sent out and they didn't find out until about 2 days before. So with that said, I think the 15 days is actually quite reasonable.
Okay, so if our letters going out are taken to the inside of the postal facility, then they will be directed to the local boxes without being sent out of the community. If they're put in that red box on the outside, that stuff's getting mailed out of the community, sent out of the community in a sack and then brought back. So if our staff are taking that inside, which I believe they are, then it goes directly to the box and should be there within a day or two. And then really, people should have that within a good timeline. So I'll let you respond, and then I'm going to go to Councillor Palmer as his hand up.
Do we have a policy that mail must be brought into the facility rather than?
I'm not sure whether we have a policy, but it's been my experience with staff that that's how they do it, because that way they know it's getting sent out rather than dropping it in that box on the outside.
So apologies, worship, going back from memory here, I think that's what happened last time is that they went in the mailbox, the red box, rather than being brought in, which added the extra delay. And then everybody in the neighborhood was caught by surprise. And if we can have some sort of something to ensure that that doesn't happen again, then I'm perfectly fine with 15 days notice.
Okay. So Mr. Simon, and then I'm going to go to Councillor Palmer.
Through your worship, so the previous application, I believe you're referring to the variance permit down on Douglas Street.
Correct.
So that was dropped off inside. So the same as we always would. Again, I know the way it is in town, people sometimes check their mail once every 2 weeks. I think the focus as a community as we go forward, rather than looking at trying to figure out which arbitrary deadline is going to be sufficient so that people are checking their mail on time, I think we need to look forward to implementing software solutions, use of online GIS. And staff are currently working on a way, and the recently implemented newsletter at the city is a really good avenue to try and inform people of current planning applications. And we are trying to find a way, and Ms. Henderson can comment on this with other municipalities' experience, but the use of online GIS tools is a very powerful way for someone to go and look at a map and see the status of a whole bunch of different applications, not just ones where a letter is required for a variance, but subdivision applications, building permit applications. And it gives the community the confidence that, people are getting the necessary permits and what stage they're at. So that is where we're ultimately going. It's obviously going to take a little bit of time for us to get there, but that would be a recommendation to council that we continue on this path to utilize software solutions to inform the community, in addition to standard notification letters that are required by legislation.
Follow up, Councillor.
Through your worship to Mr. Simon, is this the same software that Kelowna is using right now? Do you have any experience with that? It sounds like the exact same, and it's been fantastic. I've been on there.
Through your worship, Councillor Cherry, there's a variety of softwares, and the process that we're at right now, this is really the first step. And I think that the city had looked at some software historically and then chose not to go ahead with it. And our main focus right now is to get our process right on paper. implement it consistently, appropriately, and very effectively. And once we have our process right on paper and the staff are very familiar with implementing that process, then we would look at digitizing that. And the focus for staff on software is going to be something that is easy to use internally, doesn't require a lot of manpower, but also something that is going to be providing a lot of ability for the public to be able to check in on the status of various applications. So that will be a big focus. We haven't selected which software we're going to go with yet. That will be kind of the next step after this process. But implementation of software is a big process and a big project, and it impacts a lot of different departments too. So you'll certainly see something come back to council as we move along down that trajectory.
Good. Appreciate it. Council Palmer.
Thank you, Mayor Souls. My question was answered. It was regarding what we are today and what we're going to. So we're going from 10 to 15 days. I'm supportive of that. And to responding to our earlier concerns, I think that's more than adequate, including that, that there might be some inadvertent situation where they get sent to, out of town. Possibly even internally within the post office, but this provides ample time to allow some additional buffer. And I think any extending past that 15 days, the disadvantages start to outweigh the benefits. So I'm satisfied with that. Thank you, Mayor Souls.
All right, thanks for your comment. Any other comments, Councillor Stapleton?
Yeah, I just thank you, your worship. To Councillor Cherry's concerns, if your concern is regarding the notification, is that going to be, I think the 15 days is going to be enough, especially when we look at this, the new application that's in this component for the signs for notification, right? So I think between mail and a big, 4x8 placard on the property, I'm not quite sure what other.
Ms. Henderson, any comment on that?
Through the chair, yes. I think in terms of the notification that you guys have landed on is a really good compromise at the 15 days. Going beyond that, in terms of the timing and the intent of this from the province, I think starts to diminish. So I think 15 days is fair. I know the world is changing in terms of notification, and part of the future plans is the software is being discussed, but one of the projects we're working on right now is GIS improvements with the city and sort of being able to provide that online application layer. That's something that's very doable as part of the existing budget and this project. And I've been working with the GIS to try to implement that along with staff as part of this program. So the transparency is certainly increasing for the city based on this proposed bylaw.
Councillor Stapleton and Councillor Cherry.
Thank you, your worship. I just had a question in regards to the, and I don't know if it applies at this time, but the sign sitting, when are those signs going to be required to be posted on the development property?
Mr. Simon, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, for your worship, Councillor Papers, and I do just want to point out one thing to your previous comment about the notice of application signs. The notice of application signs would not be posted for a development variance permit.
Okay.
Yeah, so it would more so be for land use changes, things like OCP amendments, rezoning applications, comprehensive development plans, things that are quite substantial that are going to have an impact beyond the immediate properties potentially. So something to be aware of. And the notice of application sign, it would be submitted a mock-up with the application, staff would do a review, and then after staff have done the review, it would be posted immediately. So the intent is to get it posted as early on in the process as possible. One thing we are being considerate of for the proponents out there is we have, I think, one sign shop in town. So we want to make sure that we're not being unreasonable with our demands, but the intent is to have it posted well in advance. It would kind of coincide with the internal review of the application well beyond or well in advance of council consideration.
Follow up, Councillor.
Yes, thank you, your worship. Follow up is, maybe reaching out to Signs Inc. and trying to figure out like some kind of format that works easy. And then, I'm trying to think. Just the delegation of the authority. I know 12.61, any residential development that consists of one building that does not contain more than 4 principal dwelling units and only variances, that topic right there. So one of my concerns with delegating that authority right now is with what the province is doing with having, they're kind of stipulating that we're allowed to build 4 units on a single parcel of land. So I'm not 100% sure, or maybe you can, I don't know, I'm trying to think of how to best phrase this. But, the notification, like, you got an empty lot sitting beside you, you think it's a single family home, and all of a sudden somebody's building a fourplex. If we delegate that authority, council has no idea of what's going on, then all of a sudden we're fielding calls from angry neighbors saying they're building a fourplex right beside us.
And so if it falls within the zoning parameters and we don't know exactly what Premier Eby is going to come up with, how that works. So I'll just leave that to you, Mr. Simon, to make comment on.
Through your worship, Councillor Stapenhurst. So really important distinction. The delegated authority that is being requested here is not land use authority over use. It is delegated authority, as Ms. Henderson had indicated, on development permits, which are non-discretionary. So the only thing that we're looking at with these, potential fourplexes would be the form and character of the development. That is what council would be delegating to staff. The ability to have that use of a fourplex on site may or may not be impacted by this pending provincial legislation. We don't know the specific details of it yet. Is the province going to come out with sweeping changes that overrule anything within a zoning bylaw and say any lot over 600 square meters that's zoned residential is permitted to have a fourplex? That might be the case. And if that is the case, then neither council nor staff get any say in what permitted use is allowed there, because the province has essentially overruled our land use authority in that case. So the delegation that is being requested in here to go to staff is specifically as it relates to the appearance, the form and character, landscaping considerations of the building, rather than the actual use on site. Does that make sense? Because again, really big distinction. Staff aren't approving the use, they're approving the look of the use, if that makes more sense.
Through the chair to Mr. Simon, would that still involve the advisory planning committee and their feel like, how would that relationship work? Because right now, I believe form and character goes through the advisory planning committee.
Through your worship to Councillor Stapenhurst. So right now, the development permits are broken up between major and minor. Major are ones that go to council, minor are ones that are delegated.
Okay.
The advisory planning commission only sees rezoning applications, OCP amendments, and then major development permits. Now, that being said, if council would want to direct changes to the advisory planning commission bylaw to have them look at more, that's certainly something that could be looked at. I can tell you as the delegate or designate to the commission wants to be more involved with the policy crafting, because again, very important to remember, and Ms. Henderson can certainly add on to this, these are non-discretionary permits, which means they comply with the guidelines or they don't. If they don't comply with the guidelines, staff can't approve it and neither can council. If they do comply with the guidelines, staff have to approve it and council has to approve it. Ms. Henderson, do you have anything to add on to that, the non-discretionary nature?
Yes, to the chair, I'd also recommend that, or like to note that advisory planning commissions across the province are generally, you're starting to see less applications of this nature, development permits, development variance permits go to APCs. One is a streamlining initiative, and two, also to have the sort of advisory committee at that policy setting level, as Mr. Simon was indicating that your APC is looking to, one, to speed up the process, and two, just to have more impact by being at the policy level rather than the application level.
Great. And follow up one more time.
No, thank you, sir.
Councillor Cherry, then Councillor Palmer.
I can echo that. Their advisory planning commission is definitely tired of looking at form and character. Thanks, Your Worship. I just want to say that I commend this document for being written. It's done very well. It hits all the items that were mentioned at the UBCM Housing Conference. I do have one question. It's mentioned that if there was enough, say, negative public feedback, that would have the opportunity to come back to council. I'm just curious if we have a threshold of what that's going to be at this point, or is it just, something in the air right now?
So Ms. Henderson, I'll go to you first and then Mr. Simon.
Yeah, through the chair. I mean, it's really set up to be more of a judgment call. And I think that could also maybe ebb and flow based on sort of council's confidence in staff and administration, the ability to have conversations with the CAO if there's things that you think needs is in the public interest for council to make those decisions. I think it gives some flexibility to organizations there. Generally, there's times that items are raised by members of the public, and those concerns can be mitigated by the applicant or negotiations between applicant and staff. And if those concerns can be mitigated, I'd say that staff should continue to make a delegated decision. But if there's sort of very reasonable claims and concerns by the public that can't be mitigated, or is the applicants refusing to mitigate, to me, that would be something that I think would be worthwhile bringing to council. And my experience with staff around the province is they have a very good judgment of that. There's also a recommendation that when staff provide their sort of development statistics or quarterly or annual reporting to council, that there be some monitoring in terms of an overview of delegated decisions. And I think that would be an opportunity as well for council to have the conversation as to, you know what, in this situation, I think this is in the public interest for council to make these decisions. And I think that dialogue does continue to need to take place over time.
Great, thank you. Mr. Simon, anything further on that topic?
To your worship, to all of council, just to echo that a little bit and to give a bit of an example, it will be very context specific on the feedback that is received. For example, if we get a variance application that looks to increase height by 2%, and all comments come back saying there's not going to be enough parking for the proposed development and it complies with parking, well, then that's pretty easy for staff to look at and say, this is a minor variance. We're able to keep moving it through. There's been no comments received as per the nature of the variance request. Now, if we get a parking variance and it's already in an area where there's significant parking concerns and we get a dozen letters speaking about the impact that this will have on the community, then that would certainly be something that staff would either deny or direct to council as part of something that is in the public interest for council to make the decision on.
Follow up, Council.
Yes, your worship. With that said, and the amount of confidence I have in both staff, Nancy and our CEO, I'm wildly in favor of this.
Great, thank you for that. Councillor Palmer, you have comment or question?
Thank you, Mayor Souza. The question's been answered. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other questions from council regarding the three motions that will be coming in? Councillor Orlando.
Your worship, yeah, thank you. I've got a few things I want to unpack and some questions for the staff and consultant as well. My goal is to hopefully have a bit of a dialogue in a format that will aid everyone's understanding, my understanding, as well as public understanding of the proposal here. So I guess one thing, and it was outlined in one of the slides that was presented earlier on, is regarding scope of what is covered under this. So I think that's important for people to understand. It was went over fairly quickly. So in referring to section 12.6.1, it talks about for example, a residential development that consists of one building that does not contain more than 4 principal dwelling units. So just for clarity and for everyone's understanding, I'm hoping to ask staff. So that means we're talking about something that has 4 or fewer units. What about something that has 5 or more units that is not covered under this delegation bylaw?
Mr. Simon.
Through your worship, Councillor Orlando, that is correct, and it's a very important distinction that it's 4 principal dwelling units. So with changes in BC building code, you might be able to have secondary suites, subordinate dwelling units in there. That would still be covered under this as long as there's no more than 4 principal dwelling units. But if we had a multi-unit residential building that had 5 principal dwelling units, so a mini apartment complex, that would be coming to council. So anything 5 plus comes to council.
Okay, so I think that's important for everyone to understand that, so we're not talking about a big development, something going forward through this, so that's important. And then the next question, again, focusing on limiting scope so that there's better understanding of this. The industrial development requirement is a maximum of 2 stories, 1,000 square meters. And also is not located within 100 meters of a residentially zoned property. So any industrial development within 100 meters from edge to edge of property over 1,000 square feet or more than 2 stories is not going to be covered, and it's going to be coming back for council. Okay. So there's also several other limiting factors here that I'm not going to review over. So commercial is 500 square meters. I guess my second, my area of focus is something that I want to ask staff is in terms of notification. There's requirements spelled out in there, including 15 days with 100 meters and that kind of stuff. However, I just as an observation, I pay attention to what the provincial government is doing. Okay, so I'm listening to the things coming from the premier, his ideas. We're talking about potentially overriding zoning rules, and I understand that the spirit of what they are proposing is to get things moving more quickly and not cause delays by procedural bureaucratic types of things. So I just want to say I'm fully cognizant of that. I'm also supportive of anything that does get us to that goal of being able to just make it easier to build things in general. However, I am also a representative for everybody in the community. All members of the community, including their concerns about what happens in their neighborhood and what happens around them, and that will have a big impact on them. It's my fundamental belief that the issue that Revelstoke has faced and other communities has faced here is rooted in a couple things, often communication or lack thereof. And number two, everyone knows that public hearings can be a gong show sometimes. That's often, I think interrelated with the psychology of public meetings, group mentality, that kind of stuff. So we can have unfortunate situations. But my fundamental belief about residents of this community is they're smart, busy people who have jobs and don't have a lot of bandwidth for this kind of stuff, and really just want to have a fair go at something when it's happening in their neighborhood. They want to know what's up, and they want to express their concerns. And to give you a concrete example, we had an application in Lower Town, and one of the neighbors came out and said, where this map is showing the snow will be piled up is where we drive out of. So what's up with that? We would like that changed. That's a reasonable change that people want. They just want that. What I think happens in our process, in our formalized process, which is not ours, it's provincial legislation that does it, is we have these formalistic rules that are often have legal underpinnings that don't allow people the ability to just get there and do, express these real practical concerns, emphasize that, for example, just one thing on this whole thing is a deal breaker, but if you can fix that thing, we can work together on this, we can get there. Now, I guess, so talking about those two issues, the public hearing, and number two, the notification process. I guess what I'm seeing in concerns here is I see some good stuff around communication and notification, for example, signage, which I think is well overdue. I mean, I remember growing up as a kid, walking around my neighborhood, there were signs when there's a development. We're just not doing that here. So that's a good step. However, I'm not a bit more concerned about discretionary language around notification, in the sense that there's a lot of prescriptive wording, but there's also a lot of discretion, I think we need to be effective if we're going to notify people. We're going to have a system for getting out there, because what ends up happening is they find out after the fact, and then that comes back to us. People are express concerns about us. So I wanted to lead with another question through the chair for staff is, what existing delegation bylaws do we have? And have those, the application of those delegation bylaws led to any concerns from the public or problems in their application, and why?
Mr. Simon.
Through your worship to Councillor Orlando, we do currently have one delegation bylaw with respect to land use authority. Mm-hmm. And it has delegation in there for minor development permits and heritage alteration permits. And one of the biggest challenges we have in there is it has a dollar value fixed to what constitutes a minor development permit. When we have $100,000 affixed to what constitutes a minor development permit, and I can tell you some of the practical challenges we face, people come in the door and they say, I got a deal from such and such on the leftover materials from their project, so here's my cost estimate showing that I'm under $100,000. And it becomes very, very challenging for staff to administer. And in addition, there's no opt-out clause. So we have to follow the bylaw as it's written. And when that bylaw isn't prescriptive about how you calculate that $100,000, or even the option for staff to bring something to council, if we do view it as in the public interest to bring to council for a decision to be made, we don't have that ability right now. So those two things have certainly been addressed with this bylaw, where it's a lot more black and white in terms of what's delegated to staff, what isn't delegated to staff. And in terms of the notification requirements in the bylaw are quite prescriptive. The only time that you're seeing with respect to public engagement that there is a little bit of a judgment call on staff is with respect to public information meetings that would be required at the beginning of an application process. And that would typically be for rezonings, OCP amendments, as well as temporary use permits, because that's really affecting the use of the land rather than the look of a building. And that's where the community really needs to come out and have a say. And the reason why you see some discretion is because if we get a minor zoning bylaw text amendment, for instance, we had one where they wanted to add cafe into the light industrial zone. It was a very, very minor text amendment, and the question when it came to council is, well, why wasn't that in the zone to begin with? That might be something where it doesn't warrant a full public information meeting, but someone wanting to rezone their property from allowing 2 units on their property to allowing 32 units on their property certainly would be something that would warrant a public information meeting. And in addition to that, by expressively putting it in the bylaw the way that it is as proposed, council gets the ability a lot easier when an application comes forward to say, we want to direct the proponent to go have a public information meeting after we granted first reading. So it's really important to understand that this bylaw is setting us up for success, in my view, in terms of getting the public engaged early on, increasing the timelines for notification, as well as giving us more tools in our tool belt to require developers to go out and get feedback from the community early on in the process. Whereas right now, I can tell you firsthand, it is a struggle sometimes, and we get a lot of comments from the development community saying, show me in the bylaw where it says that. And for some, you wouldn't believe, some very basic things that staff are requesting, and we get a lot of pushback. So this will help eliminate some of that pushback, certainly.
Great. Follow up, Council.
Yeah, Your Worship. I was on council when we adopted the existing delegation bylaw. And through that process, one of my key concerns, two key concerns. One is that somebody with a development application has the ability to, that is denied by staff, or somebody who is applying under the delegation bylaw who is denied by staff has recourse to take to council for further consideration. I see that's provided for in this bylaw, so that's important. Conversely, the other question of importance to me was if staff had concerns that concerns about an application, did they have the discretionary ability to refer it to council? Because after all, council, when things go south, is primarily the people who end up wearing it. I was assured by staff that yes, of course, they would have the ability to do that if they felt that it was going to be impactful on council, that they could simply refer the matter to council for consideration. So my question is does staff have the ability, for example, on a discretionary issue to, with the existing bylaw, to refer that to council if they feel that, for example, it fits with the letter of the law, but the spirit of what is intended is going to be something that is going to be deleterious to the council of today.
Mr. Simon.
Through Your Worship, Councilor Orlando, the way that I read the current bylaw is it's black and white. These are delegated to staff. Staff need to make this decision. These are not delegated to staff and they go to council. And that's a real challenge. And I can certainly, appreciate what the spirit behind the bylaws is. But I can tell you the way staff are proposing these bylaws, and you're seeing a lot of bylaws and policies come out of the planning department right now. And our whole focus is when we are presenting something to council and presenting it out to the community, how do we ensure that regardless of who is sitting at the table in there in terms of staff shoes, that the bylaws will be consistently interpreted and applied over the years? And this is the challenge when you do get turnover, because very well, the intent may have been for, under the current delegation bylaw, to allow staff to refer things to council, but without it being explicitly written in the bylaw to say, staff, you have this ability, it becomes a challenge for staff to do that, because our job is to follow the bylaws as written by council. So in my opinion, and Ms. Henderson may be able to add on to this a bit, but I know that when you go through legal review with these things, sometimes the legal say, yeah, you know, it should either be delegated or not delegated, but this was a discussion when we went through legal review with this, and in the proposed bylaw, every single element where it's delegated to staff, there is an opt-out clause. And that is very important for staff, because when there are concerns that are brought by the community and we want to continue to foster and rebuild or build trust with the community and council, we want the ability to bring something to council. We want to be able to tell an applicant, hey, it says in our bylaw we can bring it to council, rather than the applicant saying, there's nowhere in the bylaw that says you have to bring it to council. We want you to make a decision on it. This really does allow that opt-out clause to be employed more readily by staff if it is deemed appropriate.
Quick follow-up, Councillor.
Oh, your worship, sure, yeah, sorry, I thought, Ms. Henderson was gonna.
Ms. Henderson, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think Paul summed it up quite well. And I think in the strictest sense, in previous years, lawyers' advice would have been if it's delegated, then staff should make that delegated decision. If you read the real fine print in that snip from the provincial 2019 DAPR review, there was a priority to develop a language around staff having the opportunity to opt out. And so that was something that we discussed with the lawyers when reviewing this bylaw, and they felt that with that opt-out clause, as is in the bylaw, it gives staff that flexibility to say, you know what, this is a decision that's better made by council, I'm going to opt out. And that's exactly why we've incorporated into the bylaw. That was not there previously. So it was, like Paul said, more black and white. So that's definitely a great option, and you don't have to have that denying an application in order for it to be reconsidered by council, which I think has just connotations that are negative in general.
Okay, thank you for that. So, Councillor Stapenhurst, I'll go to you, and then I'll go one more time, Councillor Orlando, if you have a follow-up.
Great, thank you, thank you, Your Worship. My only concern is that the language in here that states not contain more than 4 principal dwelling units. So the way that I'm understanding this is that we'd be able to have 4 principal dwelling units, 4 accessory dwelling units, so a total of 8 units altogether. So I'd be in favor of this if it was just 4 dwelling units altogether, rather than.
Okay, I'm going to go to Mr. Simon, then I'll go to Ms. Henderson.
Through your worship, Councillor Stapenhurst, the intent with this was to ensure Revelstoke is one of the few communities that has actually taken advantage of the changes in the BC Building Code to allow subordinate dwelling units. What we don't want to see is if we restrict it to a total of 4 units altogether, that developers will choose not to include secondary suites within their proposals because they want to go through a delegated process rather than going through a full council review process. So one thing to certainly be aware of, if council does deem it appropriate to want to change the bylaw, then certainly council's discretion to do so. But we just want to make sure that that unintended consequence of potentially eliminating secondary suites as part of these development proposals would be mitigated. And one of the control factors here is that we have no more than 1 building. Yeah. So it can't be more than 1 building. So this doesn't mean a 4-plex with 4 accessory dwelling units, carriage suites at the back. It means a 4-plex where they're probably going to be smaller units that have secondary suites in them. And I will note too that the likelihood of getting a 4-plex with secondary suites is probably going to be minimal, given how the BC Building Code is structured. You can't, not to get too technical, but you can't have occupancies with different units on top of each other. So it really is intended for something that would be like 4 row houses with secondary suites in the basement. So in terms of the appearance, the form and character of it, it really wouldn't look very different regardless of whether or not secondary suites are included.
Okay. Through the chair, with Paul Simon's explanation, then I'd be in favor of this. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Orlando, and then Councillor.
I'd like to, through the chair, thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to ask a question of staff in terms of process for, I guess the communication process for people is the main concern, and I just want to underline, my concern is that a neighbor or somebody, a community member or stakeholder has a reasonable input they would like to give, or they would like to make a tweak or a change to something, or have that suggested, and they simply miss out on that. And I guess for myself, what I'm looking for is more certainty in the language on how it's done. I don't really agree with when I see, for example, comparative amounts of how many meters we're gonna notify people in for different communities. I feel that entire discussion is not really where it's at, in the sense that if we consider all people in our community equal stakeholders and want them to engage and be a part of civic life and what we're doing, we need to make sure we give them as fair a shake as possible on having those concerns heard. So I guess my question of staff is this: if you were to take a data-driven approach whereby as many people as possible, affected parties were able to make sure that they at least had their chance to know about this and come about this, because the reality is not a lot of people engage with city stuff. It's a fairly small, despite the appearance of people writing about or media coverage. That's just done because that's generally what people perceive their job to be, is that a lot of people are just blindsided. So that's my concern here. And when the wording is they may do this, or they could do this, or the person might do this, I think that leaves out too much interpretation for people to do to try to avoid that. So I'm seeking input from staff on how they could, any suggestions they might have to make it not optional, but more mandatory in the spirit of reaching as many people as possible, and not having counselors, have someone come to us and say, I had no idea until it's after it's done. Nobody told me that, or I went to a meeting and the developer told me X, Y, and Z, and I thought that was a city person. I didn't know I was talking to, what's going on here. So I'm just reaching out to Steph on that.
Okay, Mr. Simon, I'll let you weigh in, please.
Through your worship to Councilor Orlando, I think that it's multiple avenues to get to that point. The bylaw itself, the way it's structured, it is quite prescriptive in terms of, some of this is legislated. So advertising in the newspaper for things like temporary use permits, OCP amendments, rezoning applications, none of that is going away as a result of this bylaw. The public notifications for landowner letters, that is still prescriptive for development variance permits. And as Ms. Henderson indicated, we've actually required it for even delegated variances where the legislation doesn't require it. So we have gone above and beyond for that, certainly. We've increased it from a minimum of 10 days before the file is being considered to 15 days. So trying to ensure, appropriate timing for the community to be informed on what's happening before it is decided by a delegate or council. I think moving forward, and it's not something that's going to be necessarily prescriptive within the bylaw, I think in general, the city needs to do a better job through utilizing technology to allow the community to be informed about what is happening. The development approval procedures bylaw is critically important for staff and for applicants to get certainty in how the process will unfold for various types of applications and how we will process them so that there's consistent review and processing of the application. GIS is such a critical component to this. When someone can go on to an online mapping, and if they're not familiar how to do it, they know how to come to city staff and we can do it with them at the front counter and say, here's what's happening within your neighborhood. And I can tell you, staff are currently working with our corporate services and Ms. Floyd to try and figure out an avenue, because we are still doing things manually with Excel spreadsheets on tracking our files. But how do we do something, even if it's updating it once a month and we put it on the DS webpage, we put a link to it in the community newsletter that says, here's the application number, here's a description of the application, and here's the location of it, so people can at least be aware, and putting that into GIS format so that people can see what's happening in their community becomes critically important. And in my view, that is the most effective approach to go with. And I do believe, Ms. Henderson, correct me if I'm wrong, but that is the approach that many municipalities are taking now to ensure the community is informed, even if it's a non-discretionary application where Staff, council, and the community don't really get to say it either complies or it doesn't comply with policies as written. It's an ability for them to be informed of what's happening in their community and at least have the opportunity to ask staff of, hey, what's happening with this application? Ms. Henderson, do you have anything to add for additional tools?
I think you've covered it, Mr. Simon, but I think that for a key message for council as well as, and I know you've just recently adopted an official community plan, but I mean, the OCP process is so key to involve the community and get them to really weigh in on the development permit guidelines and future land use maps and just the vision of the community. And I think that's really where it starts. And if the development that's occurring is in alignment with that, the public will, if they had a lot of involvement in the OCP, they'll probably be quite satisfied with what they're seeing because it was anticipated. But I think that the city in this bylaw is, and based on the direction we've received from council, as noted previously, goes above and beyond the standard legislative requirements for transparency. And with the improvements to GIS, that will just take that one step further.
Great, thank you for that. Councillor Cherry, you have a comment?
No, your worship, I think we debated enough on this one.
Yep. So I'm going to go one more time. Councillor Orlando, you have something very quick so we can move on. Councillor Luciano has to leave. I do believe we have a motion on the table. I would like to vote on that. But Councillor Orlando, you have something to go on.
Just a quick question. Your worship of staff, it was noted that 60 members of the development community were sent an email or consulted with on this. We didn't hear back from them. In terms of notifying the general community about these changes in this proposal, what steps were taken to notify them and what was the response from them?
Through your worship, Councillor Orlando, the focus was with the development community because they're the ones that engage in the process that will be impacted by the development application procedure bylaw. Certainly, I can tell you in our experience with the general community, this isn't a bylaw that they look at. The bylaw that the general community is really concerned with, if we really get down to it, is the zoning bylaw. That is the key one that really impacts them day to day, and staff are really focusing our efforts for broader community engagement to be at that zoning bylaw level as we did with the official community plan. So in my view, the general community, critically important pieces, OCP, zoning bylaw, these other procedure bylaws that are a lot more technical in nature, the average member of the community really won't be impacted by them in terms of going through the application process. And if staff and council and the development community are doing their jobs appropriately, then it is nothing but an extra benefit for them in terms of the additional notification requirements to inform them of what's happening in the community.
So I do have a motion on the table, correct? All right, so development application procedures bylaw be read first, second, and third time, just as a reminder. I will now call a question. All those in favor? Opposed? No, motion is carried. Thank you. All right, Councillor Luciano, do you want to stay for a couple minutes or do you need to go?
I can stay for another 15.
Okay, good. Number two, someone want to put that motion on the table for me, Councillor Cherry.
I move that fees and charges amendment bylaw number 2357 be read a first, second, and third time.
Seconder for the motion, please, Councillor Devlin. Any discussion on this motion? Just a brief thing, couple of things added and changed. Is that correct? All right. Councillor Orlando, you have a question?
Your worship, no, just a comment. I did vote against the first motion. We have two more motions. I will vote against them. Not that I'm very far off on this, but I think the wording around notification needs to be changed. And I don't support going to first, second, and third reading. I think we should take this to first reading and make an effort to communicate this to the public so they're aware of the change that's happening.
All right. Okay, so Ms. Russo, just note that Councillor Orlando was opposed to item number one. Any further discussion on number two? Seeing none, Councillor Palmer, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Mayor Souls. Through the mayor to Councillor Orlando, just a couple questions on you suggesting that this particular one just be read a first time as well as the previous motion that was just passed?
I'm just I guess mostly for just explaining my reasons, sorry, posthumously for the first one.
Okay, and
yeah.
And then just further to that, Mayor Souls, So just for clarity, I'm just trying to understand where you're coming from. So did you feel that you weren't given adequate time on addressing your concerns on the previous motion?
Your worship, I guess generally, with a change like this, I feel it's better. Like any individual application, I feel it's better that residents are aware of the change. We make an effort to let them know if we are intending to consult, so we can get some feedback. And I think going first, second, and third reading doesn't do that. So that's why. Not a big deal, but I just feel prefer.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Souls. Just getting clarification. Thank you.
Good. So any other comments on fees and charges amendment bylaw 2357? Seeing none, I will now call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Note Councillor Orlando is opposed. Balance of council in favor. Someone want to do number 3 for me and put it on the table? Councillor Cherry.
The council delegation amendment bylaw number 2358 be read a first, second, and third time.
Second for that motion, please. Councillor Devlin. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Note Councillor Orlando is opposed. Balance of council is in favor. All right, we're going to move on to 11A staff reports. Art Revelstoke service agreement. Someone want to put the motion on the table, and then I will ask for a Councillor Orlando.
Your worship, sorry, apologies. I'm going to declare conflict on this particular service agreement report just due to business relationship with the applicant.
All right. Put the motion on the table for me, Councillor Devlin.
I'll move that the city enter into a tripartite agreement with Arts Revelstoke and Tourism Revelstoke for the provision of entertainment in Grizzly Plaza during the months of July and August, and for assisting with the management of the Performing Arts Center for a 1-year term, and that the mayor and director of corporate services be authorized to sign on behalf of the city.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Cherry. Ms. Donato, you are online. Do you want to give some input regarding this agreement?
Thank you, Your Worship. So a standard agreement in front of you. We've been proceeding this way for the last few years. There is a schedule that's attached to the agreement that outlines what the funds are to be used for, and the funds are for the provision of entertainment in Grizzly Plaza and for performances at the Performing Arts Center. So I'm happy to answer any questions council may have.
Any questions for Ms. Donato? I think the agreement is straightforward. Ms. Donato, I don't see any hands jumping up for questions. So in light of that, I will call a question on the motion. All those in favor? Opposed? No, motion's carried. Thank you, Mr. Black. Bring our councillor back in. And then I don't have anything on my paper here for 11B, but I see there's a motion recommended in here for transfer.
Yeah. So it's in the report itself. Jillian could probably share her screen.
So, okay, moving on to item 11. What the heck was I here?
11B.
11D. B, pardon me. Annual surplus and transfers to reserves. So I have nothing in front of me, although it is in the report, the recommendation. So before we do anything, Ms. Moore, do you want to give some input?
Through your worship, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'd just like to highlight for council that these are estimated numbers. They're subject to change for the annual surplus. We're just in the process of getting our audited financial statements completed by BDO. And this is the last council meeting prior to the consolidated financial statements coming forward to be approved by council. And that I've broken it into 2 transfers to reserves. And one, I'd like to build the Financial Stabilization Reserve Fund. It just really helps with any unexpected costs or big snow removal years that we might have, to have a bit of funds set aside for those types of costs that we can't necessarily anticipate. And then I've also put in a motion to transfer $300,000 to a reserve for the arena redevelopment. We haven't created a reserve yet for the arena. However, we will earmark this and allocate it to that reserve once it is created. And that I have provided a list of variances as to why we have such a large surplus this year. And most of these variances we were expecting as we're reviewing the budgeting process. And we have taken these into account in the 2023 operating budget.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. So does someone want to put the first motion on the table and we can either discuss it further? Councilor Lucio?
I move that the transfer of $359,000 to the Financial Stabilization Reserve Fund in 2022 be approved.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councilor Devlin. Any further discussion on this motion? Councilor Orlando.
Your worship, through the chair, I have a question for staff. We, as a council, I think earmarked 3% for arena redevelopment reserve. And I recall that figure that would derive from 3% was not round like 300,000 exactly. And my question is, what was that original number, and is there a variance from that, and why is it a little bit different? I think it was 300 something. I can't recall.
Ms. Moore, comment.
Through your worship, so this transfer to reserve is for the 2022 surplus that we are estimating will be in our books this year. Most of it is related to increased revenue from what we originally budgeted. As for the 2023 budget that was just adopted by council, it was around, I think it was around 2.7% of the 5% will go to the arena, and that is approximately $350,000, approximately. Quick math here.
All right, Paul.
Just a quick question. Yeah, what is, if possible, what is the total now in that reserve fund if we were to make this allocation?
Ms. Moore.
Through your worship, it would be approximately $650,000. So the $300,000 from 2022 surplus plus the amount allocated with the 2023 budget, which I'm estimating is about $350,000, doing some quick math here, of a total at the end of 2023 with $650,000 set aside.
Thank you.
Great. So on the first one, any further discussion on that? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? No, motion's carried. Item number 2, someone want to put that on the table for me, Councilor Cherry?
That the transfer of $300,000 to reserves for the arena redevelopment project in 2022 be approved.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councilor Staples. Any further discussion on this motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? No, motion's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Moore. Appreciate that. I'm going to move on to 11C, Development Permit 2022-018. Mr. Simon, do you have a bit of a presentation on that? Oh, Ms. Hartling, you're here, so we'll let you do the presentation.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I'll be doing the presentation for Ms. Commerce today.
Okay, great. Appreciate that. So Councilor Lucio is going to leave chambers. Thank you, Councilor.
Yes.
Good luck. Thank you.
Sure.
Just before I begin, I just wanted to make sure that you can see my screen.
We can. Thank you.
Thanks. So the application you have before you today is an industrial development permit. It's at 703 Highway 23 North. It's DP 2022-018. So we'll go over the background, the proposal overview, policy direction, staff evaluation, and then the staff recommendation and council options. So the subject property, it's currently developed with an existing mobile home and automotive and equipment storage. It's located in the Big Eddy neighborhood and surrounded by light industrial properties and also service commercial. At the rear of the property is the railway line, and to the front is Highway 23 North. The property is currently zoned light industrial M1 in the zoning bylaw, and within the OCP, it's designated industrial development permit area and industrial land use designation. So for the proposal overview, the applicant's requesting to propose a garden center and 3 accessory buildings in the form of greenhouses. So you see in front of you here, there's 1 2-story commercial building, which is highlighted in purple. It's a proposed garden center. This is located adjacent to Highway 23 South. There's 3 accessory buildings. These are highlighted in yellow, which are to be greenhouses located behind the garden center building. There's enclosed waste and recycling bins will be located at the rear of the developed portion of the site. And there's proposed 16 paved parking spaces, which include 2 accessible barrier-free spaces. And then there is an additional 1 loading space. The garden center and greenhouses are to be fenced in with a sliding gate. And there's landscaping proposed at the front of the property, just buffering between Highway 23 South and the garden center. And then the landscaping on site will also be utilized as the exterior showroom for the garden center. So for the exterior of the building, at the front entry, you can see there's exterior garage door, which proposed in metal with Pacific turquoise coloring. For the siding and trim, it's hardy board horizontal siding and iron gray with black metal windows, with the lower portion of the building being accented with cedar shake shingles and edged by timber beams. Railings are powder guardrail coated with tempered glass. The roof is shingles and Harvard slate color on the lower portion of the roof, and then black metal roof on the top patio portion. You'll see there is a patio at the very top of the building. The garden center is constructed with a flat roof, and there may be a proposed rooftop cafe in the future. It's not planned at this time. And for lighting, there's LED pot lights and antique style gooseneck lights with shades. So just some of the staff evaluation of the development permit area guidelines for site plan considerations and parking. The proposed development does minimize the impacts surrounding land uses, and it will maintain the existing mobile home on site. There's accessibility for those with mobility limitations with the parking and the ground floor building design. There's a sidewalk for pedestrian access from the parking lot and a perimeter fence and electric gate for crime prevention. For the form and character, the building does demonstrate a high quality image that's complementary to the existing area, and this incorporates a variety of materials from metal, iron, wood, and aluminum. And the proposed building enhances the aesthetics from the roadway, and the landscaping will break up the industrial site with more greenscaping. For environmental considerations, new landscaping is being proposed. The recycling garbage bins are screened, and all lighting shall be dark sky compliant. So staff are recommending that the development permit be issued and that the owner provide a security before building permit issuance. Thank you, and that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Hartman. So let's get part number 1 on the table and we can discuss. Councillor Chair.
The development permit DP 2022-018 be issued for a new commercial building / garden center and 3 accessory buildings, greenhouses located at 703 Highway 23 South, Block 4, Section 33, Township 23, Range 2, west of the 6th Meridian, Kootenai District Plan 1024, accept plan.
All right, second of the motion, please. Councillor Stephenhurst. Any further discussion on this motion? Councillor Cherry.
Yeah, just as an addition, Your Worship, I'd like to read out that I'd like to let everyone know this went to the Advisory Planning Commission on the 7th of February. They were all very supportive of it. I think it was a great addition to the neighborhood. That's much easier on the eyes than what it currently looks like. And just some of their comments are that the development is well integrated into the context of the existing neighborhood, and the commission is supportive of the proposed enhanced landscaping adjacent to the highway. The commission is also supportive of ensuring that the landscaped area provided measures to ensure that there is accessibility for those with mobility issues.
Thank you for that. Any further comments from council? So I'll call the question of Councilor Orlando.
Your worship, just a question of staff. It was mentioned in the presentation that there may be plans for a future cafe. Just wondering, two questions, why that's not included as part of this proposal, and what is the process for getting that added on at a later date?
Ms. Hartling, comment?
Yeah, through your worship, I believe the applicant's still making up their mind about the rooftop patio. It might be used for some plants at this time, but if they are to do any exterior alterations that would alter the look of the building that you do see in front of you today, then a minor amendment may need to come back, or an amendment may need to come back to council for any changes to that would result in exterior alterations. So what you're looking at today is the exterior of the existing building. It was just noted that the rooftop patio could potentially be used for a cafe for guests that are going to the garden center, buying plants and having that experience. But the property owner is still deliberating on if that is something that is feasible for them at this time.
Answer your question, Council.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, Councilor Palmer.
Thank you, Mayor. So just for clarity, with the passing of this, which I'm supportive with or without the cafe, but if there's no substantial changes, they have zoning that they could put in a cafe there currently. Is that correct?
Through your worship, yes, that's correct. A cafe has been added. A couple of years ago, there was a bylaw amendment change that added cafe to the industrial zone, so it is a permitted use.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? No, motion's carried. Item number 2. Someone want to put that on the table for me, Councilor Chair?
That the owner provide a security for the due and proper completion of landscaping the amount of 125% of the amount identified in the cost estimate to the city of Revelstoke in the form of cash or unconditional, irrevocable, auto-renewing letter of credit issued by a Canadian chartered bank or credit union prior to issuance of a building permit.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councilor Devlin. Any further discussion on this motion? This is kind of the standard security for our community. I have no issue with this. Councilor Palmer, you have a comment?
Yeah, just a question to staff. So on one like this with the new changes, would this be a delegated decision through to staff or not? Is that not included? And that might be a question for Mr. Simon. I'm not sure.
Mr. Simon, would you like to weigh in?
Through your worship to Councilor Palmer, if I remember the zoning map off the top of my head, I believe there is a property zone R2A within 100 meters. So this would be going to council as it would be an industrial permit. If I remember it correctly.
All right, thank you.
All right, any further comments or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? No, motion's carried. Thank you. All right, going on to item 11D. Mr. Simon, do you have a presentation before I get the motion on the table?
Through your worship, this is a file that Ms. Hartling has a very brief presentation for council if they choose to have a presentation.
Sure. Ms. Hartling, could you do your presentation, please?
Yes, your worship. I'll just get on the screen here. Before I begin, you can see the presentation in front of you.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Thank you. So the application in front of you today is an amendment to a development permit that was issued by council. It's DP 2021-021, and it's an amendment to development permit for 112 2nd Street East. So I'll just go over the same background, proposal overview, policy directions, staff recommendation. So just a bit of a background before we get into the proposed amendment. The property is located in a central business neighborhood. It's surrounded by institutional, which is City Hall to the north, commercial to the northeast, commercial with some residential second-story apartment units to the north, southeast, and southwest, and a single-family dwelling to the south. The property is zoned central business, which is C1, and it's within the downtown revitalization and commercial development permit area and the mixed-use land use designation within the current OCP. So the subject property does have an issued development permit. This is for the form and character of the Base Camp Revelstoke Suites Hotel. And it has an issued building permit BP 2022-070. And as you can see outside Council Chambers and City Hall, the building is currently under construction under the issued 2 permits. So the proposed changes, you'll see on your screen, the top left-hand corners, the original approved form and character of the development permit, and then the top right-hand corner is the proposed amendment rendering. So the request is for approval for the form and character of a 3-story, 31-unit hotel with commercial retail space. So the original hotel had plans with 28 units and no commercial retail, and the applicant has proposed to split some of the larger units that were 2 floors to create 3 additional hotel sleeping units. And this addition has created some exterior design revisions, mainly due to window and door realignment. Staff have worked with the applicant and they have amended their plans to accommodate some of the comments from their last application to accommodate some ground floor retail space, 1 unit, and then to provide more canopy coverage over the sidewalk. So for the building form and character, the materials are to be retained as originally approved, and then with the following amendments. So addition of the 3 hotel sleeping units, lowering of the rear stairwell from level 3 to level 2. So just on the previous plans here on the right-hand corner, you can see the stairwell has been reduced from 3 levels to 2 levels. Removal of windowsill planters, so that's in the front portion of the building in the dark gray. Elevation revisions due to splitting the larger unit, so these are related to window and door realignment. There's the addition of the ground floor commercial retail space, which is going to be shared with the front desk area. That's to the right corner of the proposed rendering on your screen. And then an increase in canopy coverage over the sidewalk along 2nd Street. So you can just see the bottom image, the original approved rendering, where there is highlighted in red is where the canopies and there's door realignments, and then the addition of the canopies over the windows and doors along the sidewalk along 2nd Street. So the existing 31 parking spaces under original approved permit will remain, which meets the minimum 16 spaces for the hotel, 2 spaces for the commercial retail space. And there is a solid concrete wall that was proposed under the original permit. This is by the parking lot abutting the laneway, and this is to be replaced with metal railings in dark gray finish. So for the staff evaluation of the amendment for site plan considerations, it maintains the original site plan layout while creating additional rooms within the building. The changes to the parking area from the laneway, from the solid concrete wall to the metal railings, this is more in line with SUPTED principles for preventing crime in a parking facility. And the metal railings are more compatible with the existing window railings and the railings around the amenity area under the original approved plans. For the form and character, it's maintaining the original approved form and character, the addition of the reception and commercial retail space located out front. Lowering of the rear stairwell to the level 2 does enhance the building character and facade. The revisions to some of the windows and doors due to the elevation and splits of the units remain consistent with the original building visual and approved form and character. And all the materials are not proposed to be changed, so materials and colors will remain the same as the original approved. For environmental considerations, the canopies have been increased to further enhance the pedestrian streetscape and provide weather protection. The removal of the window sill flower planters was mainly due to snow load and maintenance issues, and the applicant is required to replace and plant the trees along the sidewalk, and they will be still proposing the raised planters along Orton Ave by the parking area. Recycling garbage bins are still in the same area, screened from view, and all lighting is to remain the same, dark sky compliant. So staff recommend that the development permit be issued.
All right, thank you, Ms. Hartling. I appreciate your report. All right, council, someone want to put this motion on the table for me, please? Councillor Devlin.
Move that the amendment to development permit DP 2021-021 be issued for the form and character of a 31-unit hotel building with commercial retail space at 112 Second Street East as per in the parcel.
Great. Second for the motion, please. Councillor Cherry. Discussion on the motion. Councillor Cherry, and then I'm going to weigh in.
Thanks, Your Worship. Through your worship to Ms. Harling, can you comment why additional parking requirements or additional parking spaces aren't a requirement when there's additional rental units?
Through your worship, so the hotel requires 0.5 of a parking space per unit. They propose 31 parking spaces, so they actually only require 16 parking spaces for the hotel. And then commercial retail space is calculated by floor area of the commercial area, and it's calculated as 2 spaces. So they would require 18 spaces for the development, and they're proposing 31.
Okay, thank you.
Other comments? So Ms. Hartling, when I look at this and I see this amendment to the development permit, as they're working on this building, a little concerning for me, but I would love nothing better than to say, you're going to do some commercial retail space. Let's put commercial retail space on all of Second Street. Does any of that sort of purview come to council, or are we beyond that?
To your worship, staff have discussed with the applicant for commercial retail. It's not a requirement under the commercial downtown revitalization development permit. It's recommended, and there is stronger language that we added into the current development permit area guidelines to capture that for future applications. As this is an amendment and the development is already underway, those units could potentially be converted with the way they are accessed, but at this time, the applicant has agreed to do 1 commercial retail to maintain the hotel spaces. So those are discussions we've had. This is the result after those discussions.
All right, thanks for that input. So Councillor Palmer and Councillor Staples.
Thank you, Mayor Souls. I just echo your statements, and if the developer is listening to this or pondering that, certainly would be supportive and encourage more commercial at that level. I think it's needed in the downtown. We have basically 0 vacancy, and it's needed in our downtown core. So, but I'll leave that with that. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments, Councillor Staples.
Yes, through the chair to Ms. Harling, I was just wondering, where exactly are these parking spaces?
Through your worship, they are, I don't have it on my slides. They're interior, so they're accessed off of Orton Ave. So it's about a courtyard that goes around. It's a U shape off of Orton. The parking spaces are interior that they slope down a little bit off of Orton. I can bring my screen up just to show you the access. I don't have the site plan on my slides though. So you can see off of Orton here, they go in and it's a U shape within the interior. And they're, no, I don't have it here.
Through the chair to Ms. Harling, I saw it on my presentation. I saw it as kind of like a horseshoe shaped building. So I'm assuming that center courtyard is going to be where the parking is. I don't have any further questions. Thank you, sir.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. And so basically that parking is really not going to be seen from the outside. Is that correct?
Through your worship, that's correct. The parking's not changing. The only change is the railing guard. So it was a concrete cement wall, which has changed to a fence along it. So if you were walking along, you would be able to look in. So there is some visual component to being able to see the parking, but it is still screened, and it does meet more crime prevention for parkings at a commercial hotel unit.
Yeah, that's just what I was thinking. Having it screened in is going to be a benefit to those who are there at that unit to be able to see it as they're walking by. So any other comments on the motion on the table? Councillor Chair.
Thanks, Your Worship. Just for clarification, Ms. Harling, the proposed amendments to the overhangs in front of the windows on the first floor, are those going to be able to hold snow, or is snow going to be falling off those onto the sidewalk?
Through your worship to Councillor Cherry, the first floor overhangs, you mean the canopies?
Correct.
The canopies would be able to hold the snow load. They are sloped, so if it does slide off onto the sidewalk, that's where we do have the sidewalk plows, and all businesses are to maintain a clear sidewalk throughout the winter.
Thanks for that. I think, sorry, Your Worship, my only worry there is that it could open up to liability issues if snow's falling on people.
So that's where they have to guarantee they have insurance, and where they in that. So is that correct, Ms. Hartley?
Yeah, through your worship, they do have to enter into an agreement with the city as it does encroach over the sidewalk, and that is captured into the encroachment agreement.
Great. Anything further, Councilor London?
Sorry, just to follow up on that, just to double check, because I didn't take a close lens. There's not any concern about snow falling off on the sidewalk. Like, I mean, it's designed.
There's gonna be little canopies over the
Yeah,
door,
it's just
other than that, nothing.
Sure.
Okay. All right, so if there's no further comments, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? No, motion is carried. Thank you. All right, going on to correspondence, public comments on proposed fees and charges increase for bed and breakfast operations bylaw 2355. And I just want to make a comment and then a possible motion. And so my comment, Mr. Simon, with that, basically we put that in place to potentially come into play January 1st, 2024, correct? So my motion would be, if someone would like to second this, that Development Services send a letter out to all current bed and breakfast owners, notifying them of these rate increase proposed for January 2024. Someone want to second that motion? Councillor Cherry. Any discussion on that motion, Councillor Staples?
So just so that we're clear, we're going to send out a letter notifying the businesses of this intent, provide them the opportunity for feedback, and then, or is it still?
It's my motion is to basically notify them, this is what the fees are going to be. And so that they're well prepared ahead of time. We're already getting feedback, but I think we need to move forward. And then, so if you pass this motion, we'll talk a little bit more about how we get there. So.
Just add to that, we'll have another motion afterwards.
Okay, all right. So, yeah. All right, so any further discussion on sending a letter out? So, Mr. Simon or Mr. Palmer, you have your hand up, but I don't see your face. You want to weigh in?
Thank you, Mayor. So is the motion on the table right now?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, so it's interesting, kind of predictable. I think probably all the B&Bs are well aware of it, but I'll be supportive of the motion. The question I have is, like we sort of debated the wisdom of 3 readings last meeting, and if we're going to put this opportunity for feedback, I would suggest that a 3rd reading be rescinded if we're going to take it seriously, or are we just simply notifying that we've already made up our mind, this is where we're going. So it's just a comment, and I get.
Yeah, and so I appreciate that comment. My motion is to notify them that this is potential, this is what we're going. We haven't did the final reading or adoption, correct? So, but at least to notify them that this is where we're going, these are what the fees are. I think they should all be notified by letter rather than just by hearing it through the community. Any further discussion on that motion?
Yeah, so Mayor Souls, if I may just follow up on that, then I'm supportive of that approach. If council ends up, if depending on the nature, I mean, we've received letters already. I think it's pretty clear of their concerns. We may need to either we press ahead, or we may need to reconsider. I believe maybe need to reconsider a 3rd reading, but I'll just leave it at that for now. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Appreciate that, Councillor Staples.
I'd like to just maybe add that we include in the letter being sent out that we include the Chamber of Commerce and the Revelstoke Accommodation Association, so we can get the feedback from those two organizations.
So in my motion is to send out, letting them know, not asking for feedback.
Okay.
So we can include that if you're okay with that, Councillor Cherry, to notify them.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so we'll add those two as well. All right, so I'm going to call it quite. Councillor Orlando.
Your worship, thank you. So as I understand it, the motion is to send a notification to people that we're moving ahead. You know, that is the plan for this. And just, you know, one thing I wanted to point out for council is when you consult on things, you know, you have a process and you listen to everyone and then you formulate what you're doing. However, if your intention is just to do something because we've duly elected representatives here and we're moving forward with it, I think, you know, for better or worse, whatever your decision is, if the plan is to go for it, then go for it. Don't consult and then go for it. And I think that's in part what the intention is here. I also understand there's another motion coming. I don't know what that is, but I just wanted to sort of express that that's what my understanding of what we're doing with this motion. So.
Okay, Councillor Stigler.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to Councillor Orlando's point, I'm a little unclear as to what's you know, from when we were looking at the policy for educating to the development office their powers to approve. There was an emphasis on communication and data-driven decisions. So far, what I'm seeing with this B&B is that we're ignoring the communication process and we're ignoring the data-driven decisions, and we're just moving ahead because we're elected officials and that's what we get to do. So that's just my comment. Thank you.
All right, appreciate that. All right, so they're it, Councillor Orlando.
Yeah, Your Worship, just by way of feedback, this discussion resulted in a notice of motion from a councillor. That was not me. Staff prepared a report outlining the costs to administer the system. We are moving towards cost recovery so that the people who use the service to run their business are paying for those costs. Not everyone else who does not run that business and is currently covering those costs. There never is true cost recovery in the city operations. You know, there's always gray areas. However, I believe we should, when appropriate, strive to do that. And this is part of a reform. And so I think in terms of data-driven decision-making, that was what is contained in the report and outlining what the costs are. And the fee schedule that is being proposed here corresponds with the costs. We're looking to recover the costs for those who are incurring the costs, not so the everyday taxpayer who struggle with affordability and not running a business in their place do not have to cover those costs, which they currently do. Yeah, just that's my comment. And if the councillor who sponsored the motion or created the motion, Councillor Chair, if you wanted to comment further, I'd be welcome.
I appreciate the opportunity. You've said the words for me, to be honest with you. That was the point of this. This is a conversation that started when the previous STR bylaw came up, where people didn't want to see the increase for STRs when B&Bs were left out for the same services. Here we are, a year and a half, 2 years later. The conversations come up about B&Bs and again, moving towards that cost recovery method for a service.
Just if you may, if I may, Your Worship, just to that point, I mean, we talk about data-driven, and we look at the cost recovery. I think the cost far exceeds, like, I think it's an astronomical jump. I think when you look at, you know, the fees that hotels pay, you know, it's not really in comparison or in relation. It's and not to mention, I mean, if we're looking at this from like an aspect of like short-term rentals, I'm not really sure how the two go side by side because it's kind of two separate issues. And we can get into that if you wish. But the increase, when previously asked, I was told that we've seen an increase in a total of 2 bed and breakfasts since the short-term rentals bylaw has gone into effect. So, you know, and you know, for data-driven policies, I mean, we're only looking at one set of numbers on this. We're only looking at the financial costs from the processing fees and the enforcement fees. But we're not really looking at, the financial costs that, or the burden that we're placing on these families. And we're also not looking at like the data from the tourism, the lack of accommodations that's affordable. So I think we're not really getting a full picture on this, but yeah.
Okay, so the motion on the table is for staff to send letters out to the current bed and breakfast to notify them of the potential increase in cost. I will now call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? No motions carried. Now, I understand Councillor Cherry, you may have a motion that you would like to put on the table.
Yes, thanks, Your Worship. I might need a little bit of wordsmithing help here as I am a new councillor. I'd like to put forward a motion that a policy be enacted for stakeholder engagement and that be initiated and considered by staff when recommendations to council have direct effect on specific business classes or organizations, and that a summary of engagement be provided to council prior to implementing changes, and that go to the committee of the whole.
Okay. So is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Staples, further discussion would you like to allow?
Yeah, the reason I'm bringing this up is, we've received a bunch of emails, and although none of them actually said anything negative towards increasing the fees, a lot of them seem to be caught off guard. So in an effort to not have this happen again, I'd like to see a policy scoped so that we get public feedback early on while not affecting this motion.
So your motion, you would like staff to bring back something and we discuss it at the committee of the whole?
Correct.
And have a further discussion on it, then we can kind of fess out really where you're wanting to go and feedback from capacity, et cetera, from staff. Is that correct?
Correct, but at the same time, basically having public input prior to third reading or prior to adoption.
Okay. So it's not as clear to me as what it was.
Sorry.
I think
I'm working
in my
on
mind, but now I'm not in disagreement with us having further discussion at a committee of the whole to kind of get down to the nuts and bolts of how this would play out. And then Ms. Floyd can give us perspective from legislation, but also Mr. Simon can give us perspective from capacity and staffing issue. So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm going to actually do that. And so if I'm hearing you right, so in a situation like this, we would send people a notification saying, hey, our intention is this is coming to council to deal with bed and breakfast. We want to notify you so that you're aware that it's coming to council and you may want to either pay attention or be in the council chambers. Is that kind of what you're asking for?
that would be an anecdotal reference to it, yes.
Okay. All right, Councillor Staples, do you have your hand up?
I think what Councillor Cherry proposed, I think what Councillor Cherry is proposing is great. I think, we've heard Aaron or Councillor Orlando speak before about, communication and being data driven. I think the key element that's kind of missing in all of this is consistency. And I think what Councillor Cherry is proposing is having a consistent, reliable method that's council approved so that we can go out to businesses, we can inform them of decisions that are coming forth that's going to affect them, give them the chance to weigh in, to write to councils, because right now the process that's currently in front of us is, we're receiving comments on the very back end of something that's, for all intents and purposes already approved. So that's my understanding of it, and if that's the correct understanding, then I'm in support of it. So.
Okay, Councillor Palmer, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Marisol. Interesting discussion, and certainly the motion has merit. However, it raises a few concerns. First of all, this was very predictable. Last meeting, if you look back on it, the backlash from the public was very, very predictable and directed staff. And then the second concern that I have is, again, it has merit. And however, we're doing a lot of work, a lot of policy stuff, and I think we're reacting to one situation, which in hindsight, we might have just done first and second reading. And so I'm just concerned about adding more work that might detract from other council priorities to staff. And then the third point is that the unintended consequences. So if we start going down the thread of all the policy stuff, and we say, for example, we say, okay, well, the policy is going to only go to second reading. There'll be a question, well, should that just be integrated in the bylaw? And then suddenly, are we creating more bureaucracy when we do actually want to move things along in an expeditious way? I think based on those concerns that I have, I'm going to be opposed to this motion, and it's not reflective of the merits behind it, but I think the disadvantages outweigh the advantages at this point. And also, we already have those tools. If this comes up again, I think we'll be reminded on a similar thing, which was quite predictable. Thank you, Mayor Souls.
All right, thank you. Councillor Stickners, do you have further comments?
Just to Councillor Palmer's points, is there the possibility of incorporating what Councillor Cherry is proposing into the communication plan, and then that way it's going out through communication to the public with zoning and references, and then that way we're still getting the information out there in a timely manner. People are getting access to the information. I don't know if there's some kind of compromise there between what the two proposals.
Okay. Any other comments? So I'll go to Councillor Lanham and then Councillor Devlin.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just sort of in response to that, I'm supportive of the general idea. My predisposition is to refer it to staff for recommendations on this. Absolutely, Councillor Stapenhurst, that's what we're getting towards. In 2019, the city did a survey, a communication survey, just sort of asking staff or asking the public about what they wanted to find out from the city, and that's really what I'm hoping to drive. Is not what our needs are at the moment to tell people, but what do people actually want to know from us. And one of the things that was very clearly highlighted in that survey was there was 3 out of 10 satisfaction on actually knowing what's going on at this table. People do not know what's going on anymore. Times have changed. There used to be comprehensive reporting of what's going on here. That does not happen anymore. It is complex and technical and bureaucratic, and it's very hard to follow. It's common for people to come, sit here, watch the whole meeting because they're interested in one thing, and then walk out and go, what happened? I have no idea, because of all the language and that kind of stuff, and that's very common. So but the key hold up here is resources, and that's getting communications professional in place. We're working on that. We have pre-budget approval. I think, for example, the CSOD might be a good example of an organization that manages to summarize their meetings through communications staff in a good way that is just simple and laid out in terms of like, okay, here's what happens, here's what they decided. And I would really like to see us move towards that and also integrate that with our email newsletter so that you can say, here's what happened. We do that to some extent right now. There's some highlights, but it doesn't necessarily get into all the details. And then, if we can say, all you got to do is sign up to your email, you'll get it, and you'll have a knowledge of what's happening at the table, and that will be a benefit. So anyways, my feeling is to, instead of putting wording directly with direction, to leave it a bit more with staff to figure out how they're going to integrate it with various ongoing processes. And the end goal is really give me a summary as a member of the public to know what's going on, so I don't have to feel like it happened behind my back. And then I would just like to speak to the predictability of this. Yeah, I mean, obviously some people are going to be upset if we're upping the fees by a lot, but I think from my perspective, it's just looking at the facts in front of us in terms of what the costs are and who should pay for that. And I think it should be a user pay system, and it hasn't been, and we're moving towards that. So,
okay. Councillor Devlin and Councillor Palmer.
Through your worship. So I think a couple points here. If the motion on the table is simply to bring this back for a conversation at a committee of the whole, totally fine with that. We can absolutely do that. I'll support that. That's not anything that anybody shouldn't support, I don't think, because there's always room for more conversations. That's why we're here. But sort of to echo what Councillor Palmer said, I think, and I'm not trying to put words in his mouth, just as I understand it, what he's saying, there is the ability for us to slow some of these things down if we feel that public communication, it doesn't need to open to public feedback necessarily, or it doesn't need to open to consultation, but it can be slowed down to, say, a second reading if we feel that it's something that might be contentious and require public feedback. So we don't always have to go 1, 2, 3 in one motion if we're worried about it being a contentious thing. So, I mean, there is sort of that system in play. We just don't have a specific policy to do it, which is actually kind of a benefit in a lot of situations where we don't want it to move very slowly. That's all my comment is.
All right, thank you. Councillor Palmer, you want to weigh in one last time?
Thank you, Mayor Souls. Yeah, so good discussion. I'm concurring with Councillor Dedlin and Councillor Orlando. And so if basically without messing around with amendments and stuff like that, if this is coming back to the committee of the whole for discussion and staff not spending a whole whack of time on policy development, I'm fine with that. And then we can sort of pick it up from there. I think Councillor Orlando's points around communication, and maybe this is something to refer to the communications committee in a sort of a broader sense rather than a one-off. So I'll support it based on the sort of the sense of a dialogue without extensive staff time going into researching policy on this item.
All right, so I'm going to go to Councillor Cherry one last time, and then we'll call him.
Thanks, Your Worship, to council. The goal here, it's a good goal. I'm not trying to slow the process down. I'm not trying to do anything negative or nefarious. This is coming up just as we've received, I think, 4 or 5 emails with the business license increase, where their direct comments weren't necessarily that they didn't want to see the change. It was just finding out about it in the 11th hour. So I'd like to bring this to the committee of the whole to have a better, more robust conversation about how to not have that happen every time we make a decision. And I do understand that the community does have an obligation to pay a little bit of attention to what we do here.
Yeah, good. And I'm all for us having that conversation. I don't want to get things to be on our staff. Councillor Staples, one last time.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Councillor Cherry for taking the initiative with this. And I think, maybe more so, I gladly welcome this conversation to be at the committee of the whole. And maybe view this more as a missed opportunity for the newsletter and developing some clear and concise language and parameters on like what we want reported in that letter. So that's my comment. Thank you, sir.
All right, I'm going to call the question on this motion. All those in favor? Opposed? No, motion's carried. Councillor Cherry, is there anything else?
I just appreciate you guys, you run through that. I don't have a picture of a bit of the wordsmithing there, so I'll get better.
Good. All right, moving on to communication strategic priorities chart, Mr. Parliament.
Nothing to add. We're still making some changes. There'll be an amended one for your May meeting, your first meeting in May. I've worked on some of the stuff on the organizational side with staff, so expect a new updated one in May.
Thank you. Any comments from council? Seeing none, moving on to Heritage Advisory Commission meeting minutes. Councillor Cherry, comment.
Thank you, Worship. Just to provide you guys with what's happening, the Heritage Management Plan is pushing through. Currently slowly, because it is a big document. I hope to have more feedback in the next meeting, but there's a robust discussion about the document and what direction we want it to go. A lot of robust feedback. Everyone's kind of taking into the next meeting to continue to read up and look at other examples in other communities.
All right, thank you. Any comments from council? Seeing none, moving on to APC. Councillor Cherry again.
Thanks, Your Worship. Just give me a second to look this up. In the last meeting, the zoning bylaw comprehensive
rewrite.
Zoning bylaw comprehensive rewrite workshop number 1. Mr. Simon led the workshop. The commission did a lot of listening. Given a little homework for once. Thanks.
Good.
I look forward to having more to bring up in the next meeting, but unfortunately it was mostly just introductory.
Perfect. All right. Any comments from council? Seeing none, moving on to Revelstoke Area Economic Development Commission, Councilor Orlando, your committee.
Your worship, thank you. I'll keep it real quick. I encourage anybody who may be watching on YouTube to go read the report. Some of the items from our March meeting was synergy and update on housing summit, including discussion of OAP online accommodation platform funding and how that is to be deployed. An update from development services on housing initiatives, an update from tourism Revelstoke on the destination management plan as it relates to housing. And we also had a Tech 3.0 update, so revising the strategy there for including new directions. And the final item is the Economic Development Commission objectives and strategies. So continuing to work on the visioning and process for that. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Any comments from council regarding that? Seeing none, Ms. Rousseau, any questions from the press?
No questions from the press, your worship.
All right, thank you, Ms. Rousseau. All right, council, I'd like to make a motion to go in camera pursuant to section 90.1D and E of the community charter. Someone want to make the motion? Councilor Stapleton, Councilor Devlin, all in favor? Motion's carried. We're going to go in camera. We'll take a 5-minute break before we go. And let's let our corporate officer make her